Semester number 2, lesson number 32. Our aim today is how did the Vietnam War affect American society? And we're going to see today that the Vietnam War becomes really the first war in American history that is strongly protested. And you do not have a general feeling of buying into this war. And a lot of people are against it. A lot of people protested in a lot of different ways. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the three things we're going to talk about today are for the Vietnam War are the actual feelings about the war, the reactions to the war, and we're going to focus on the Kent State protests, and the impact on American society. The first thing we're going to talk about is the feelings towards the war. At the start of the war, the United States government had the American public believing that they had to go to war. All right? They believed they were fighting to protect their country. Eventually, however, they're going to realize that the entire concept of the war was flawed, meaning everything that they pushed to go to war for was not really 100% true, and the government wasn't being 100% true with us. And a lot of people were upset about that. And on the right here, it says resist the draft, don't register. You have a lot of what we call draft dodgers. A lot of young American boys or men, whatever you want to call them, 18 years old, who were being drafted and sent to Vietnam. And a lot of protests began to, kind of tell people they didn't need to register or they shouldn't register for the war, for the draft. And, that was illegal, but it was a form of protest. One very prominent person that refused to go to war after being drafted was Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, because he refused to go to war, was actually put in jail. And he was also stripped of his heavyweight title in boxing because he didn't agree with the whole premise of the war. So our first talking point is, why did people view this war as flawed? Do you agree or disagree? Explain. And we'll talk about this tomorrow. Make sure you have something to respond to with this. The reaction to the war. Point number 2. Americans increasingly disapproved as the war dragged on. They believed conflict in Vietnam was essentially a civil war in which the United States had no right to interfere. College campuses led protests, and veterans returning home marched together to demonstrate their disapproval for the war. So you had disapproval all over the place. You had a lot of people disagreeing with this war. And Vietnam was a civil war between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese. And a lot of Americans felt that it was not their place to get involved. A lot of colleges across the nation staged protests, all right, and they were very anti-war. And veterans who were returning home were even against the war, and they marched to show their disapproval. So really, all in all, this was a war that was not approved by the general population. Along with that are the Kent State protests. All right, Kent State is a college in the United States, and the protests at Kent State turned to tragedy. Students were protesting the Vietnam War, and it began to get a little out of hand. The Ohio National Guard was sent in by the federal government, and 4 students ended up dying, which was the first non-peaceful protest. Well, it was the first time the federal government had to get involved and violence had to be used on a protest for the Vietnam War. And I want you to look at this picture on the right. All right, look at everything going on in this picture. And the picture in the previous slide, there's a talking point now. The picture in the previous slide was seen worldwide the day after the Kent State tragedy. How does this picture help to define the time period, the Vietnam conflict, and the Kent State protest? Explain. And we're going to talk about that in class. Make sure you have a response for that. And the third point is the impact on American society. The U.S. did not only pay the debt of the Vietnam War in blood and money, but in political cost as well. It weakened the public's faith in their government, and as never before, Americans after the Vietnam War neither respected nor trusted their own government. This is going to be a huge turning point in American history for the trust that the people of America have in their government. All right, after this war, I'd say a good majority of the people do not trust the government, and the reason is during and leading up to the Vietnam War, a lot of things were, not really what they seem to be. And there's a few talking points for this one that I want you to keep in mind. Why do you believe the American public had very little trust in the government after Vietnam? Explain. Do you find this similar to the war in Iraq? Why or why not? So compare this to the war in Iraq, which is more present day. Do you find it similar? And do you trust our government? Explain. And these are, put some thought into this. Do you really trust our government? Why or why not? And we'll talk about that tomorrow in class. Our check for understanding today. Most Americans who oppose sending United States troops to fight in the Vietnam War believe that 1. Nuclear weapons should be used to end the war. 2. The war should be extended into China. 3. The United States should not police the world. Or 4. International trade would be interrupted. And we will go over that answer together in class tomorrow. Your assignment tomorrow in class, we are going to read a little excerpt on the Kent State tragedy. We're going to read a newspaper headline. And the question you're going to answer is, who do you believe was responsible for the Kent State tragedy? Do you believe the blame should be placed on the protesters or the federal government? Explain in detail using evidence from the reading, the notes, and our discussion. And that's got to be 6 to 8 sentences. And we will go over that tomorrow in class. Have a good day.